The Allen Line Company appreciates all of the dedicated carriers it takes to move loads across the U.S. Stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Recently, the Federal Highway Administration announced $148 million in grants that will go to 11 states and Puerto Rico. The grants are designed to help ports in those locations reduce the emissions from large trucks that work in those facilities. Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine and I will speak with Shailen Bhatt, the administrator of FHWA, about the grants, where they're going, and what they'll be used for. When it comes to lease purchase agreements, OOIDA advises everyone to avoid them at all costs. But some might wonder, why is that? We'll take a look at the dangers and pitfalls of some of these agreements and explain how they could leave you worse off than when you started. And finally, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has made some changes to the pilot program designed to bring drivers under 21 years of age into the interstate trucking workforce. I'll get the latest on this important topic from Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is launching a new campaign against fraudulent movers and brokers. It's called Operation Protect Your Move. As the name implies, the enforcement initiative will address complaints against moving companies that handle household goods, along with brokers not complying with federal regulations. FMCSA conducted a similar moving company-focused operation in the spring of last year. The agency says that campaign turned up more than 1,000 violations that FMCSA officials acted on. The new Operation Protect Your Move campaign begins at the start of a busy summer moving season. Mover and broker fraud is part of a broader issue that falls under FMCSA's regulatory umbrella. Last week, the agency said it plans to maintain its final rule on broker and freight forwarder financial responsibility. Last November, FMCSA published a final rule meant to improve broker security regulations, most notably the suspension of operating authority if available financial security falls below $75,000. Although the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association believes the rule is a step in the right direction, it argues that the agency should be doing even more. Seeking to strengthen the rule, OOIDA filed a petition for reconsideration in December. FMCSA, however, recently informed the association that it will stay the course with the final rule, which took effect in January. Our ongoing coverage of the Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore continues. The new development, nearly 2 months after crashing into one of the bridge's support columns, the container ship Dolly has been refloated and is back in port. Several tugboats led the way at a speed of about 1 mile an hour. This matters because it frees up the channel for cleanup and recovery efforts. Officials have previously said they plan to reopen the port's draft channel by the end of this month. The container ship itself will remain in port for several weeks, but the crew aboard, which hadn't been allowed to leave since the disaster, were finally able to get off the Dolly after it docked. Another member of Congress has signed on to support a bill that would guarantee truckers the basic right to use the bathroom at shippers and receivers. Representative Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin is the seventh lawmaker to co-sponsor H.R. 3869. The House bill, known as the Trucker Bathroom Access Act, is about as simple as it gets. It would not require any funding or any new facilities. It would simply require that shippers and receivers make their bathrooms available to truckers who are dropping off or loading up at their facilities. This bill is a true bipartisan one. Its sponsor, Congressman Troy Nehls of Texas, is joined by 4 of his Republican colleagues and 3 of his Democratic colleagues in the House on the bill. It also has the support of OOIDA. To get your representatives in Washington, D.C. on board, head to fightingfortruckers.com and click on the Key Trucking Legislation tab at the top of the page. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance's latest commercial vehicle blitz is in the rearview, but it's not too early to start thinking about the next one. CVSA's International Road Check ran for 3 days last week. It'll be several more weeks before we get numbers on how many vehicles were inspected and how many violations were noted. So until then, we look ahead to July 7th. That's when the Alliance's Operation Safe Driver Week begins. While Road Check focused on inspections, Operation Safe Driver Week is focused on safe driving enforcement. Over 7 days, law enforcement personnel in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. will be on the lookout for commercial motor vehicle drivers and passenger vehicle drivers engaging in unsafe driving behaviors in general. But every year, there's also a special focus, and Jake Elaverta, CVSA Director of Enforcement Programs, tells us this year is no different.
So the focus this year is unsafe driving or reckless driving, and that typically encompasses, as you indicated, multiple aspects. In previous years, the focus had been with speed, COVID and post-COVID. The speed of vehicles involved in crashes were up significantly. So we had for several years had been focusing on speed in and around commercial vehicles. But the other types of violations that we're looking for is the unsafe lane changes, the following too closely, failure to use your turn signal, failure to obey traffic devices, whether it's a stop sign or traffic signals. Those are the types of focus areas that we've been concentrating on. We've also been looking at distracted driving. The use of cell phones is very prolific out there on the highway, as well as seatbelt usage. Again, for the most part, seatbelts provide safety for the operator if they do get in the crash, and particularly with the severity of a crash, when you take a passenger vehicle and involve it with a commercial motor vehicle, the severity of the injuries can be much higher than that if it was just a passenger vehicle versus a passenger vehicle.
Operation Safe Driver Week runs from July 7th through the 13th. A federal judge late last week began hearing arguments for and against New York City's congestion tolling plans. The city is all set to start charging all vehicles driving into Manhattan south of 60th Street during daytime hours. The change takes effect on June 30th. It'll cost most passenger vehicles about $15. For commercial vehicles, the toll could be as high as $36. But the judge could throw cold water on those plans. Opponents argued against them in court on Friday. From environmental concerns and a lack of due process to a lack of adequate mass transit options for commuters and other financial concerns, plaintiffs range from the state of New Jersey to public school teachers and local Republican officials. The bridge in southeastern Texas damaged in a barge collision late last week is back open, but some semis will have to stay off of it. The U.S. Coast Guard announced that the Pelican Island Causeway Bridge opened back up Saturday night. The incident happened last Wednesday when a tugboat backing out of a fuel storage operator lost control of two barges it was pushing. Nobody was injured, but the bridge was damaged and up to 2,000 gallons of vacuum gas oil spilled out. The bridge was inspected and officials say it's safe, but there are some restrictions in place. The Coast Guard said the maximum gross vehicle weight for the bridge has been set at 42,000 pounds. According to a previous estimate from 2011, about 9,100 cars and trucks cross the bridge on an average day. Truckers traveling through the town of Niagara in New York have a new travel stop as an option. Quickly's Travel Center opened up over the weekend. Located off Interstate 190, the location includes a truck wash, cat-scale showers, and what the company describes as ample truck parking. And finally, how many people named Kyle can fit in one place? For the city of Kyle, Texas, not enough. The Associated Press reports that 706 Kyles of all ages turned up at a park in the Austin suburb last week, hoping to break the Guinness World Record for the largest gathering of people with one name. The crown is currently held by a town in Bosnia that got more than 2,300 people named Ivan together in 2017, according to Guinness World Records. So maybe next time, although a previous attempt in the city of Kyle last year turned up nearly 1,500 Kyles, so they're going in the wrong direction. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, Tyson Fisher and I will discuss port emission grants with Shailen Bhatt, Administrator of the Federal Highway Administration. And Ashley Blackford will discuss the problems and pitfalls of lease purchase agreements with OOIDA's Tom Crowley. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
Get the most power performance out of your rig with Howe's Diesel Defender. It provides maximum lubricity and contains specialized IDX4 detergent to clean and prevent deposits and safely removes harmful water. Visit HowesProducts.com for more information.
Attention professional drivers, do you owe money to the IRS? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. Call for help now, 855-976-4291. That's 855-976-4291.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Recently, the Federal Highway Administration announced $148 million in grants to 11 states and Puerto Rico for truck emission reductions at ports. Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine and I spoke recently with Shailen Bhatt, the administrator of FHWA, about those grants, where they're going, and what they'll be used for.
Yeah, so look, I think that when you think about supply chain, and Americans began thinking about supply chain quite a bit after the issues with COVID here the last few years. I think Americans who don't really think about transportation that often suddenly realize that ports and getting goods into the country and out onto our highways are an incredibly important part of that supply chain. And now that we kind of figured out some of those supply chain issues, I think one of the things that we want to make sure as we are, relying on these critical pieces of infrastructure, that both for the people who work there and the people who live around them, that we're trying to minimize the impact so that while the rest of us are enjoying the goods that come in or go out, people aren't getting the emissions or dealing with lots of backups of trucks. And so it's about making sure that, people are, able to have a high quality of life, even if they are in close vicinity of these hugely important economic drivers for our economy.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can kind of outline the basics of this grant program for us. How much is going where for what?
Yeah, so there's obviously $400 million in the program totally through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And again, the name of the program is Reduction of Truck Emissions at Port Facilities Grant Program. So, there's, projects across the country, from Alabama to California, Hawaii, up to New Jersey, Texas. And, at these, and again, all of our programs are way oversubscribed. I think it both drives home the need for investment, but also the hunger for improvements in our ports. And I was in Louisiana, so they're going to get $7 million to buy 14 heavy-duty, all-electric terminal trucks and 5 light-duty vehicles. Well, that's about 15% of their heavy-duty fleet there. And, when I was actually in Savannah at their announcement, they had one of these, Class 8 haulers there, and somebody walked up and said, "Is it running?" And it was, because if you've been around a port, those big diesel haulers, you know when they're running. So it's whether it's the noise, the vibration for the drivers, or the emissions that we see. I think it's just a lot of good. So most of the, I think a lot of the grants that we're providing are for electrifying or finding, cleaner ways of moving the drayage vehicles in and around the ports. There's some others around, low emission diesel and fuel injection technologies. And then a couple are around operations around the port to just speed, vehicles in and out and cut down on congestion.
Okay. I want to get a little bit more specific about who will receive the actual grants, the actual money, and specifically, will part or all of that go to people who actually own the trucks at the various ports?
So I think it depends. And so I think trying to think here, there's one of the recipients is a company called Current Trucking in Indiana. And so the beneficiary is the Port of Indiana Burns Harbor, but Current Trucking is going to receive $4.4 million to replace diesel vehicles that they're using at the ports. Whereas the Port of New Orleans, as I mentioned, is receiving that funding because they're the ones who own those vehicles. So it's kind of a mix. It just really depends on like the Port of Newark container terminal is going to get $2.2 million to replace 20 diesel vehicles. But in Florida, at Port Everglades terminal, Crowley Logistics is going to receive the funding. So it's kind of a mix across the board as to who's actually going to receive the funding.
Our audience is made up primarily of owner-operators, or to a great extent, people who either own or work for very small fleets, which of course make up the majority of the trucking industry. Some of the grant programs in the past have seemed to have been or are perceived as giving a disproportionate amount to larger fleets. Do you have an idea at this point, or can you give us an idea what portion of these grants will go to the smaller trucking companies?
I think we can probably have our folks follow up because it'd be hard for me to parse that right now. But what I would say is the eligibility. I think one of the things that we want to make sure is that we aren't just whether it's building bridges, building roads, whatever it might be, or in this case reducing truck emissions. We want to make sure that it isn't just either the ports or the trucking companies that have the means that are coming in and grabbing these. We have wide eligibility to make sure that if small owner operators want to partner with a port, they're able to do it. So I'm happy to have the team follow up with you on that.
I'd like to talk about the portion of the grants that's going to charging infrastructure. In some of these ports, especially the larger ones, we have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of trucks that are coming and going. And the greater the amount of those, or percentage that is electric, the more you're going to require a pretty large number of chargers just to keep them moving. Looking at these grants and looking at that portion of it, how far do you think that will go in terms of meeting the demand for charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things, right? So we're building chargers out there, and any of the chargers that are going in on the interstates for passenger vehicles or for freight have to be publicly available and accessible. Here, with these reduction of truck emissions at port facilities grants, they're, for the most part, going to be behind the fence of a port. So I think that they will be scaled to the demand that is present now, but with the ability to grow as that demand grows. And so I think that is we are in the, I would say early days here. I mean, I've worked globally in the private sector. And when I think about ports like Singapore or Hamburg, they're pretty far down the road of electrification. So I think American ports are beginning to move into, and again, it's not just the trucks, it's the cranes, it's all sorts of different, light duty vehicles that are out there. And so I think that the scaling will occur as, and again, we're not demanding anybody replace these with electric vehicles. This is coming from demand from within the ports and from the operators who are saying, hey, we can make a profit. Our job is to help build the infrastructure so that we're able to ease that transition.
Hey, this is Tyson speaking. I had a question, kind of looking ahead. So I know right now the main focus is on the charging infrastructure for battery electric trucks. But that's because that's where the immediate need is, and it makes sense. But looking ahead, especially with the long haul trucking operations, it looks like with the current zero emission technology, hydrogen is the way to go. That being said, does the administration have plans to kind of do some funding or look into the hydrogen charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so when we asked the states to come in with their plans for the NEVI program and for CFI, we asked them to designate alternate fuel corridors. We didn't ask them to designate electrified vehicle corridors because, as you mentioned, hydrogen, particularly for really heavy freight shipments, is a very viable and used fuel that is out there. So I know in Georgia, Massachusetts, New Jersey, they have deployments around hydrogen. Now, what is interesting, when I was the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware back in 2011, we put charging stations at the I-95 welcome station so that some lonely Volt, I guess at the time would have charged. I wouldn't have dreamed that you'd be having Class 8 freight haulers coming in to charge, but the batteries have gotten so much lighter, so much more effective, and cheaper that you are now. Obviously, there's a trade-off between weight of the batteries and weight of whatever you're carrying. But I actually see, again, you're probably not going to be hauling aggregate using electric vehicles, but for a lot of our freight shipments on some of these longer distances, it's actually going to be viable in the near future. But I agree with you. Hydrogen is a key fuel, and it is eligible for our CFI grant. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know if we awarded Georgia, but I know they had put in a hydrogen grant as part of the CFI program.
Administrator, I want to go back to the electric issue. And part of the concern that we've heard from people out there in the industry with the charging infrastructure specifically is the ability of the grid to supply enough electricity to actually power those stations without overstressing the system. To what extent do these grants deal with that?
Yeah, so I think, when you look at the Volterra, the facility when I was down there and looking at it, and this is true not just for this grant, but even for the CFI pieces, a lot of these stations that are being built out, and again, this through the private sector design, they're including a large amount of solar generation on site, right? So, they're recognizing that they're probably going to pull from the grid, at times of high peak demand, but they also want to generate within these places. They're looking at alternate, sources of energy, bidirectional, sometimes using vehicles as storage for the grid. This whole V2X concept where it's like vehicles for everything. But absolutely making sure that when vehicles come up to charge, that the electrons are there is one of the reasons that as part of this initiative, we've stood up a joint office between the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. So we're not just going out there as transportation folks saying, hey, let's just plug in this extension cord and see what happens. There's the Department of Energy who is on the side of generation, who is on the side of making sure that the grid has resilience. Because if we electrify at scale in the coming years and decades, we're going to need a lot more power, and that's why DOE is part of these efforts.
Okay. I noticed one of the grants was going to New Jersey for propane-powered vehicles. And I know that lowering CO2 emissions is part of this whole thing, but as a fossil fuel, propane is going to create some CO2 emissions. Why is the administration funding a conversion of that kind instead of just going all electric?
So I was just trying to pull up. So I guess they are, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be sensitive to what people are coming into us with. And again, that's why we're not saying you must be all electric or all hydrogen or all, low emission diesel. In this case, they're replacing a bunch of older diesel vehicles. And these vehicles, after a few years, you can hear them, you can smell them, you can see them. And so if they have low emission propane vehicles that they want to help transition, we're not anti-fossil fuel, but we are trying to promote a reduction of emissions, and that's what they're able to show through this grant.
That was Shailen Bhatt, the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, discussing grants to reduce emissions from trucks at a number of ports. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Landline Now, welcome back. Tom Crowley joins me now. He is the regulatory specialist in the compliance department at OOIDA. Tom, thanks for coming in.
Good to be here.
Today we are talking about lease purchase agreements. I'm curious, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear lease purchase agreements?
Bad things. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is usually, is ripoff too strong?
Nope.
Because most of them out there are a ripoff. Mm-hmm. Most of them have no intentions of the driver ever owning anything. And that's the thing. We get a lot of calls in the compliance department about these lease purchases. And inevitably, when they tell me they're in a lease purchase, I can already tell you most of the time the direction the call is going to go. Mm-hmm. And it's not pleasant.
Do you cringe? I mean, you've been here for several years. Do you cringe when you hear that?
Yeah, 15 years. Yeah, well, I don't, not a lot makes me cringe anymore. But because in the compliance department, I mean, we bleed with these folks. They call in and they tell us, how bad things are in certain situations. And as a driver myself, I've spent many years on the road. We do bleed with them. And they, in these lease purchases, you got folks that are living on advances that are never bringing home a paycheck. I mean, it's ugly. And there are so many out there. And the pitfalls, I mean, you got recruiters that do what they do. They recruit. Mm-hmm. And they talk a hell of a line. But the bottom line is most of them intend on the driver owning nothing.
Now, for those who might be unaware, what is a lease purchase agreement?
Well, I mean, and the whole lease issue, you got lease, and lease. You can lease your truck. If you own a truck, you can lease it with the carrier. That's a lease. We all know you can go to Ryder or Penske and lease a truck from them. That's a lease. And then you got the lease purchase. This is where a carrier, and many times the scenario is a carrier buys trucks, has company drivers. They drive these trucks, say they put, 500,000 miles on them or so, run out the warranty. So then the carrier's got these trucks that are like, what am I going to do with these now? So they start bringing in what they call lease purchase operators. They come in and sign a contract that is many, many, many pages long, written by lawyers in favor of the carrier. And most of the time, the contractor doesn't read it or doesn't fully understand it. I mean, you've got lawyers writing this stuff, and then you've got truckers who, do not probably have the education of a lawyer, reading this and trying to understand it and saying, hey, I think this will be all right. You've got a recruiter there saying, yeah, patting you on the back, Honest John there, patting you on the back and saying, oh, yeah, you'll do fine. Then these folks get into these situations and these lease purchases. I mean, I've looked through so many of them and ran the numbers on them. I mean, they literally come down to where there are actually only pennies per mile, maybe pennies per mile going to the driver. And that's if a lot of things don't happen, if the truck doesn't break down. You got the trucks, the company drivers have got all the goodie out of them. Now they want you to buy them or supposedly buy them, pay all the bills on them. I've seen people get into trucks that literally are junk, rolling wrecks. They get into them. The first week out, the truck goes down. It needs brakes. It needs all kinds of just minor issues even. And that driver that just jumped in that truck, they're responsible for all that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, you mentioned but why are these so problematic?
Well, and like I said, it's because when you get into a truck, I bought several trucks myself. When I go to buy a truck, I come up to the truck fairly clean, and by the time I walk away from that truck, I'm pretty dirty because I've crawled all over that truck. I've looked at everything to see, and I got a little mechanical experience, so I can kind of look at it and get a feel for how it's maintained, how it's been taken care of, based on the miles that are on it, what the condition it should be in. Many of these drivers that come into these lease purchase situations, they don't get to pick out a truck. A truck is assigned to them, and they just get whatever comes down the road. If you don't get to pick out your truck and take it to a shop and have a mechanic look at it, I don't like buying things sight unseen or getting into situations sight unseen.
Now, I assume these companies who are putting these lease purchase agreements out there, trying to get people to sign up for them, they make it sound good, right? Like they do a good job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they got some of the best recruiters. I mean, they pull folks in, and, when you're a truck driver, especially a new truck driver, as I was one once, you kind of have this dream of, man, I want to own my own truck and my own business. I mean, that's the American dream is, to go after your own. They use that. They use a lot of tactics, sales tactics, as far as, it's towards the end of the day. We need you to hurry up and sign this. We got to go. We got to get you on the road. You got to get out there and start making money. Who are you going to make money for? That's the thing. The recruiters, they're good at what they do. I think they'll answer for it one day, but maybe not in this lifetime, maybe in the next.
What are some of the most common things? Like you said, you've been here for 15 years. What are the most common things you see when it comes to these lease purchase agreements and the people who call in and ask questions about them?
The biggest thing I see, one of the most prevalent issues that I see, Ashley, is that they get into these trucks and they barely get off the lot and they have problems. In the best situation with these lease purchases, I mean, they're not geared for they're not geared for the driver to make money. They're geared for the carrier. So in the best situation, if you have no breakdowns, no issues like this, maybe you'll make a couple of bucks. Not enough to probably sustain your home life, and not enough to pay your mortgage and your, whatever bills you have at home. But, I talk to a lot of folks that get in these that basically live in their truck. They don't have an apartment or a house or a car payment or stuff. Everything they own is in that truck, and they are depending on 100% on that carrier being up front and on the level with them. And it doesn't usually turn out that way. And then suffer one breakdown and you get in the hole, and it's usually a hole that you can never climb out of.
Yeah. What are some other red flags? You mentioned, oftentimes people who are signing up for this, they're like, you got to sign up quick. You want to get making money. We want to get you on the road. What are some other red flags? Obviously, if somebody's rushing you, that's a red flag.
Yes.
What are some other red flags?
The things, there are some of these bigger carriers that do these, and while I would love to throw out names, I'm sure that you would rather I didn't. Some of the bigger carriers that do some of these lease purchases, there are lawsuits out there going on some of these. Check this out. And I know everybody, if you're going into a situation and you don't have any skin in the game, meaning you don't have money for a down payment or deposit, this type of stuff, if you think a carrier out of the goodness of their own heart is going to make you an owner-operator, is going to pay all the money to buy that truck and make you an owner-operator, I'm afraid you're going to have a rude awakening coming. They're looking to take advantage of you. They put their heart and soul into it, and they work hard, long hours. I mean, a trucker is expected to work about 70 hours a week as it is, and they work all these long hours. They live on advances. They live on meager existence. I mean, I've talked to people that basically say, if it wasn't for the generosity of some of the other truckers around them, some days they wouldn't eat. And these carriers, they're unconcerned. They're only concerned with their own bottom line. So check out, do some research on carriers. Usually, if you do a little research on the carrier and their lease purchase program, and if you're honest with what you're looking at and you be honest with yourself, you'll see that they're probably not a good option. But, People go into stuff idealistic. They only see what they want to see, only hear what they want to hear. And when reality comes at them, it's tough.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've been in this position for a couple of years, and like you said earlier, we bleed with these people who call in and are in these situations. And I received an email the other day that I did pass on to you, and you responded. And kind of the general situation that person was in, they said they were in a lease purchase agreement. The company said they were drawing up the contracts. They hadn't seen anything yet. They've been paying on the truck. They've been paying on the trailer, insurance. There were repairs, had I think a $1,500 repair bill. And then
Which is cheap.
Which is cheap, yes. And then we're told, because of cash flow problems, they weren't going to be getting paid. And they're like, what do I do in that situation? And what was your response?
Well, a lot of people in that situation, they're thinking there's something legal that they can do. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Do they have the money to pursue a legal thing against a carrier? So my response in a situation like that would be more about, you need to really be honest with yourself, evaluate your situation, and see that if you're in a lease purchase and you don't even have a contract, as these folks didn't, that's because this carrier is just so blatantly bold as to they're not even going to go to the formalities, and I use the little air quote thing, formalities of drawing up a contract, because they know that you're not going to own anything and you're out there working your butt off, and it's to the carrier's benefit. So folks like this, I would tell them that, I never tell anybody to abandon the truck. Take the truck back, just because you got DAC reports, you got ways that carriers can screw with you if you abandon their equipment. So get the truck back. But when you show up at the carrier's lot, especially if they're telling you, we got cash flow problems, we're not going to be paying you, you're already living on advances. So what are they going to, make sure you would take that truck back. Don't show up there with a truckload of stuff, your personal stuff, because you'll probably be carrying it out of there. And don't show up there broke, expecting to be paid. I would take enough money at least for an Uber out of there and maybe a bus ticket home. That was something that my dad, when I was first starting out driving, I was going across country. And, back then, of course, that was in the 80s. He handed me a $50 bill and he said, keep this. You don't know what's going to happen out there. You might need a ride home. And I kept it for a while.
Yeah. Good advice.
Yeah.
If someone does find themselves in one of these situations, or they're thinking about getting into one of these situations, how can OOIDA help out?
So often we don't talk to people till after they're in the situation. And, there's not a lot of help then. I mean, you're in a bad spot and you need an influx of money and guns and lawyers and all this kind of stuff. That's rough. Call us before you do this, before you sign this, before you take that bus ride to that carrier that's promising you all this crap that's probably not going to happen. Yeah. Call us beforehand. I mean, at least then you'll go armed with the knowledge of what it could be. And many times, we've, here at the association, we talk to a lot of people. And we usually have some information on a carrier, especially a lease purchase carrier, and can kind of tell you what that recruiter is not telling you. The actual what it is.
Truth, yeah. Finally, what message do you have for people that you hope they get from this conversation when it comes to lease purchase agreements?
Lease purchases, they promise you everything with nothing down. And that you don't get something for nothing. Now, granted, you'll sweat for them, but they don't plan on giving you much. If you're not putting money in it, if you don't have skin in the game, I think you're foolish to expect that somebody's going to make you an owner-operator. It's just not how it works.
All right. Tom, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
That was Tom Crowley, the regulator specialist at OOIDA, talking about the dangers of lease purchase agreements. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibrotech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibrotech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has made some changes to the pilot program designed to bring drivers under 21 years of age into the interstate trucking workforce. Here to bring us up to date on this important topic is Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, glad to have you here. Let's start with the basics. What are the chief changes that FMCSA has made to this program?
Yeah, there's two chief changes that the agency has made at the direction of Congress. And I love to be critical of FMCSA for things, but this one, they are just following orders from Congress. So when we start criticizing this approach, just remember that it's members of Congress who did it, not the agency. But basically, they are saying you no longer have to register your apprenticeship program with the Department of Labor. And also, there won't be any requirements of inward-facing cameras being used in the trucks when these younger apprentices are learning to drive. Our good friends over at ATA, who represent large carriers who are trying to enroll in this program, have identified inward-facing cameras as a major stumbling block to them getting the type of registration for the apprenticeship program that they had hoped. We think that those claims are a little bit dubious. I'm happy to get into more detail, but that's really what's happening. FMCSA is following orders from Congress that were included in the latest appropriations bill funding the Department of Transportation to make these two changes in the hopes of improving registration, improving participation in the program. But we don't necessarily think that's going to happen.
Well, let's talk about that level of participation because that's a big part of the story here. Walk us through the figures. How big is participation by both carriers and potential drivers?
I don't think we can call it big whatsoever. You know, they plan to have dozens and dozens of carriers with potentially hundreds and even thousands of drivers enrolled in this program, and it's just simply not happening. I mean, I think they've approved just over 30 motor carriers to participate in the program. Some of them don't even have apprentices yet. And there's only been about a few dozen apprentices to get through the program. So the numbers are pretty paltry. I mean, there were promises of this program being extremely popular amongst 18, 19, 20-year-olds looking for a jump start into the industry. But, like we said, and like we've always said, it's not the inward-facing cameras, it's not registering with the Department of Labor that's preventing you from getting these registrants. It's the fact that even 18, 19, 20-year-olds see a bad deal when it's offered to them. And it's difficult to join the trucking industry right now when you're 18, 19, 20 years old because the pay isn't good. The work is difficult. You're away from home many nights. It's not necessarily appealing. We think if ATA wants to address whatever perceived shortage they believe there is or whatever turnover problems their members are actually facing, the best way to do it is to make the career of trucking more appealing and more sustainable. And you'll start to see people actually stay in the job because they're being paid well, they're being treated well, and they feel like they have opportunities. And until that happens, you can scapegoat whatever sort of technologies or bureaucratic hurdles you want. You're not going to get the type of registration you want. And I think that's being played out now before our eyes. And I'm not sure what the next scapegoat will be as far as why this program isn't getting the type of registration that ATA had promised and had hoped for. But we suspect there will be another thing to blame, and the blame game will continue, all in an effort to prevent large motor carriers from really addressing the true problems that are preventing folks from joining the industry and staying in it.
You know, I am interested in kind of this whole thing of dropping the inward-facing cameras, which I assume were there to kind of keep an eye on these younger drivers and spot any problems that occurred. But
sure.
What seems odd to me is that so many carriers have gone to these inward-facing cameras for their existing drivers, but wanted to drop them for younger drivers. And I'm assuming that once those drivers are out of the apprenticeship program, won't a lot of them simply have to deal with the cameras then?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, surprise, people don't like inward-facing cameras, drivers specifically. That shouldn't shock anyone. And frankly, from OOIDA's perspective, we're glad the ATA is saying that drivers don't like inward-facing cameras, and it's an impediment to getting them involved in the industry, because we couldn't agree more. However, that's ATA talking out of one side of their mouths. Out of the other side of their mouths, they had been pushing the Department of Labor to allow them to require their owner-operators to use inward-facing cameras, and that would not be considered an element of control that would ultimately affect that worker's classification. So they like them. They like them when they benefit them. They don't like them when they don't benefit them. There's not consistency on inward-facing cameras specifically within ATA and from large motor carriers, and we think that's a real problem, because you bring up a really good point. I mean, we're not pushing for inward-facing cameras on any driver, but if you're doing it on 18, 19, 20-year-olds to make sure that they are being trained properly, that might make some sense. When you're doing it on veterans of the industry who have been driving for decades and have millions of miles of safe driving, that's not necessarily something we believe is necessary. We think those drivers have proven that they are the most reliable drivers, and they've gone through the training and the experience to become the safest, most reliable drivers. So they probably don't need a camera facing on them.
The other big change here was dropping. I know it's nuts.
I think our listeners will understand the points I'm making, though. They don't want cameras on them. They don't want motor carriers forcing them to use these cameras. But if ATA is going to oppose it for 18, 19, 20-year-olds, we're certainly going to use that down the road when they try to wiggle through requirements and regulations to get owner-operators to use inward-facing cameras as well.
The other big change to this program is dropping this requirement that they meet the standards of the Department of Labor for apprenticeship programs.
Yeah.
And again, not the reason that this program was having problems, this pilot program, but nonetheless, it was something I remember us talking about at the time and saying that it had some importance. Why was that important, and why is it a problem that they've dropped that?
No, we thought it provided an appropriate level of oversight, frankly. Now we're a little bit concerned about what types of things carriers will do without that oversight. And, our frustration is when this was rolled out, when this apprenticeship program that included the registration, that included inward-facing cameras was rolled out, ATA said it would be the gold standard in training. And now they're moving in a completely different direction, trying to get away from that oversight, trying to limit what type of technology is used in the vehicles and for training purposes. And if it was the gold standard then, why is it no longer the gold standard? And frankly, again, it's scapegoating. The registering with the Department of Labor was not. We don't think any sort of arduous task for motor carriers. It wasn't preventing people from being interested in the program or being approved for the program. So we just view it as another example of some sort of excuse for why ATA has been unable to get 18, 19, 20-year-olds behind the wheel in this program.
Just a few seconds left, Colin,
Sure.
But it seems to me that all of this is missing the whole reason that having these younger drivers involved in the industry, interstate, is a problem, which is the whole thing that they're just not statistically as safe.
No, not at all. I mean, if you've talked to Todd Spencer about this issue lately, he'll tell you we should be increasing the minimum age for joining interstate. And I chuckle because that's not likely to happen either. But he brings up a good point that 18, 19, 20-year-olds lack a lot of the, one, experience driving to be safe, and two, the maturity to make good decisions when they are on the road. So we're firm that we believe 21 is an appropriate age, and we've opposed going lower, and we will continue to do that. And we will look at this program with a lot of scrutiny because it is not unfolding the way that folks had promised it would. And we're concerned certainly that they'll go for another attempt to just bring in 18, 19, 20-year-olds down the road through Congress, which we'll have to fight, certainly.
Okay, well, Colin, thank you very much for all the information.
Sure, thanks for having me.
That's our show for today. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.